Alright, so our objective today is that we're going to learn how to get formula mass from a chemical formula. Yesterday we looked at a chemical formula, we looked at what it was, and we learned how to count atoms. And the reason we need to do that is because it is a stepping stone to actually being able to calculate formula mass. Because you have to be able to count the atoms before you can calculate formula mass. So, your essential question for today is, how do you calculate formula mass? Okay? Now, what formula mass is, it is basically the total mass that is within a compound. So basically it's the mass of a compound or mass of a molecule. So the total mass of all the components within the molecule would be the formula mass. Now this is going to be important to you, especially when you get into chemistry and if we get into being able to do some stoichiometry and some moles and things like that. If we have time, we're going to start looking at, you need to get the formula mass in order to convert into moles and actually look at amounts of chemicals, especially when you're going to start looking at chemical reactions and how much of a chemical do you need to put in order to yield or make a certain amount of product. So that is why you need to learn how to do formula mass. Now basically formula mass is just a calculation, and so there's several steps to it. The first step is to count the atoms of the different elements. So what we practiced yesterday, you need to be able to do first. Okay? You need to know how many atoms of each of the elements there are within that formula. Then you're going to find the mass of the elements. Where can you find the mass of the elements? On the periodic table. Okay? So looking at the periodic table, you're going to look for the atomic mass of each of the elements within the chemical formula. Then you multiply the number of atoms, or the amount of atoms, by the atomic mass. And then you add all the products. So it's fairly simple to calculate formula mass. What you need to make sure that you don't mess up on is counting the atoms. If you count the atoms correctly, then your formula mass should be correct, because multiplying and adding is not hard, and you should be able to do it. So, looking at H2O. What was the first step? Count the atoms. So, first of all, what are our two elements?
Hydrogen and oxygen.
Okay. Ivan, how many hydrogens do I have? 2. Okay. Jesus, how many oxygens do I have? How many oxygens? 1. Okay. So that's your first step, to make sure that you know how many atoms of each one you have. Then you're going to look for the mass. Okay? So Juanita, what is the mass of hydrogen? You can look it up in your periodic table because you're not supposed to memorize it. Am I memorized? Well, although that one I do have memorized because that was me. Oh boy. Of hydrogen. 1 point what? 008. Okay, so 1.008, which usually when I do these, I round to the nearest hundredths place, so I would do 1.01. Okay? Liliana, could you give me the mass of oxygen? Liliana, can you give me the mass of oxygen? Look it up on a periodic table. I'm sure you don't have them memorized. Yeah, atomic mass. 16. It'd be 16.00 because it's 15.999. So it's 16. So once you do that, you're going to multiply those numbers. So if you look, I know that hydrogen had 2. I multiply it times 1.01 AMU, which gives me 2.02 AMU. Then oxygen had 1. I knew the mass is 16.00 AMU, so the product is 16.00 AMU. Then what's my last step, Jose? I add them, right? So if I add them, my answer ends up being 18.002. So 18.02. So the formula mass of H2O, which is water, is equal to 18.02 AME. So technically, the hardest part of this entire process is to make sure that you count the atoms correctly. If you do that, everything else is simple. Yes, Antonio?
Is that what we did for the
Yes, and I have to apologize if you looked at the blog. I messed up. Whenever I did the formula mass, I multiplied the numbers instead of adding them. But it's 18.02. Okay, and I already went in and corrected it on the blog. Yes?
I don't know where you get 1.01.
From the atomic mass of the periodic table.
It's 500, it's not.
Because it's 1.008. So I rounded to 1.01. No, you want to do it to nearest hundredth place. Yeah, you want to be as accurate as possible. So I did do them hundredth place. You could do them to the to 3 decimal places, but I just used 2, and most people will only use 2. So you always want to round to the hundredth place. Now the reason the oxygen is 16 is because it's 15.999. When you round that to the hundredth place, it ends up being 16. Okay? Does that clear it up? Okay. Alright, so what I want to do to practice this is that, first of all, that's the end of the notes. They're short. That's
Not short.
But what I want to do is, yesterday, you filled in this table. Number 1, number 4, number 6, you should have gotten right because I looked at your molecules. What I want you to do is, I want you to do 1, 4, and 6. 1, 4, and 6. Now, don't worry if you don't have a little space at the bottom. I had to kind of cut and so on. Just do it on a piece of paper. You can just do a flip page on that page. So, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes, this shouldn't take long, to go through